Welcome to What's New in Prisma, and today we have a really exciting release following last releases, the 3.01, which was quite a big release. And today we have a much smaller release, and we are going to get right into that. So, welcome to What's New in Prisma. As always, we do these live streams following the release 2 days after. We have a bi-weekly release schedule. So that means every 2 weeks we release a new version of Prisma. We've maintained this pace for quite a while now. And so today we have a smaller release, as I mentioned, and let's bring up the release notes so that we can get right into this. And so I have the release notes for 3.11 right here for you to see. And we're going to dive into this in a moment. Before we do, I want to let you know that, as always, this is a space where you can ask questions. And the goal of this is really to make your experience using Prisma easier and to make the upgrade process easier. And so I'm glad to have you all here today. I see that a lot of you are joining. So it'd be lovely to also hear where you're joining from. It's always fun. And besides that, yes, so we will get into this. We're going to do a demo of some of the improvements that we have in. We'll also take a look at planet scale and what some of the new features, especially referential integrity, what that means. So let's get right in. And let's start with referential integrity. So some of you may be familiar with a feature known as referential actions. In fact, referential actions was released to general availability in the last release. That was 3.01. And referential actions was quite an important feature for many of you out there, especially because this is an important feature that allows you to control how relations are handled by the database right from your Prisma schema. And so referential integrity is a really critical one. And before we sort of dive straight into it, I'd like to give a bit of background about referential actions. So one moment, I'm just going to load that up. Okay, so referential integrity. What is that and how does that relate to referential actions? So some of you may be familiar with the way that relational databases allow you to define, when you're defining a relation between two tables, you can define a foreign key constraint. And what the database typically does, this is the case with MySQL, with Postgres SQL Server. What the database does is it allows you to control what happens when related records are modified. For example, the most common example for this is you have the classic example of a user model and a post model. Each of these models maps to a database table. So you have a one-to-many relation between a user and a post. And in that case, when you have a user that has, say, 3 posts, what happens when you delete that user? Should the posts be kept? Should their foreign key be set to null? Or should that be restricted? All of this is something that can be controlled on the database level. And we exposed that, as I mentioned, in the previous release. I'll quickly open that up so we can skim over that. So here we are. In referential actions, we have a similar example with a litter box and a cat, where a single litter box can have many cats. And as you can see, the new syntax is essentially, it allows you to use the @relation argument in the Prisma schema. It allows you to pass this new argument, these 2 new arguments, specifically on delete and on update. And essentially what you do is you pass in what is the action that you want to do. So in this case, we have restrict. And what restrict means is that if we have a litter box that has cats associated with it, and you try to delete a litter box, but it still has related records, it will fail. We also have the cascade option, which will mean that when the litter box is deleted, all of the related cats will also be deleted. And we also have the set null the set null option, which will actually keep the posts but remove the relation to the litter box, that is. Okay, and we have, of course, extensive docs for this. I can quickly open that up. So referential actions, there we go, we have it. And so here we have quite extensive documentation. I did a demo during last What's New in Prisma. So we have here all the options: the set default, set null, no action, restrict, and cascade. Okay, so that was referential actions. Now, how does this relate to referential integrity? Well, this idea that the database will essentially manage how these related records are managed when you do an operation on one, like deleting one or updating one, and then cascading that onto the related records, all of that logic is typically implemented in the database. So that is something that when Prisma generates your migrations, it looks at these on delete and on update arguments that you pass to the relation attribute in your Prisma schema. And based on that, it generates the migrations, and it tells in the SQL how these foreign keys should be handled. And what that means is that the Prisma schema allows you to control this behavior, but at runtime, this is something that is handled by the database. So it's a database level feature. And as I mentioned before, it's supported in MySQL, in Postgres, SQL Server. Most relational databases support this. Okay, that was that. So PlanetScale came along, and PlanetScale does not support defining foreign keys. And they have very good reasons for why they do this. In case you're not familiar, PlanetScale is based on a technology called Vitess, an open source technology that was used, I believe, at YouTube in order to scale a lot of their MySQL workloads. And in order to do this, they came to the conclusion that maintaining foreign keys is something that adds quite a lot of burden, especially when it comes to database migrations and having sort of your tables locked by these database migrations. And so for scaling purposes, because one of the big features of PlanetScale is that it offers you incredible scalability options, it does not support foreign keys. Okay, so to work around this limitation and still allow you to define the behavior for what happens, basically referential actions. So in order to sort of work around this limitation, we're now introducing this referential integrity setting in preview. And what that allows you to do is it allows you essentially to tell Prisma that you want Prisma to manage those referential actions and essentially to manage all of the referential integrity. I'm going to pause there and see if there's already some questions coming in. And okay, so we have a lot of you saying, hi, guys. Yes, someone asked whether we support Golang. Yes, we do, and we will get to that in a moment. Okay, so we had this referential integrity that now has a new setting. It's a new preview feature that allows you to set that to Prisma. And when you set that to Prisma, what happens is that Prisma will try to emulate the behavior of referential actions and maintain that referential integrity on the Prisma layer. And that means two things. It has two implications on how the generated migrations work. The first thing is that the generated SQL migrations will not contain any foreign key constraints. And then the second thing is that when you do, say, a deletion on a user and you have the relation on post set to cascade, Prisma will emulate the behavior that is typically handled by the database on the Prisma layer. And in order to enable this feature, you need to go to your Prisma schema and add referential integrity to your preview features flags. And second thing is you need to set in the data source block the referential integrity to Prisma. Okay, so that was all good. But let's look at what this means in practice. And I'm going to do a demo. And for this demo, I've prepared a very simple app that uses Prisma to connect to PlanetScale. And let's open up here the project. So here I have this schema, and I'm going to close the sidebar. Okay, so we have this schema. As I mentioned, we have two models, a user and a post, and a single user can have many posts. And here I've defined this on delete cascade configuration. And what that means, as I said before, you delete a user, all of the related posts will be deleted. In fact, this can be set to one of the 5 options that I mentioned. For now, we'll leave that at cascade. Now, when referential integrity is set to Prisma, Prisma will have to handle this. And so if we look again at the migration that was generated from this when referential integrity is set to Prisma, you will see that there are no foreign keys in the SQL, again, because PlanetScale does not support this. Okay, so how does this look? Well, I've set up a little seed script here that is going to create 2 users, and for each of these users, it's going to create 2 blog posts. And I'm going to run this seed script. So npm run seed, I have a shortcut in my package JSON, and that will first delete all of the records in the database and create these 2 users. Okay, great. So we had these 2 users created for us. And I can also get Prisma Studio running. So npm run studio. And that'll just help us explore the data as we're making changes to it. So there we go. We have these 2 users that we created and the 4 blog posts, and 2 are attached to each user. Okay, let's go back to the code and look at this example script that I've created. And the first thing is that we have this script here that just gets the users and the count of posts that they each have. If I run this npm run get users, we will see again what we saw in Prisma Studio. Great, so we have these 2 users and each of them has 2 blog posts. That's all great. What happens when we delete a user? Typically, that's handled by the database, but because we're using PlanetScale here, this will be managed by Prisma. And so here I'm just doing a single deletion of the Bob user. And what I expect to see is that both Bob and the 2 related posts will be deleted for us. And this is emulated by Prisma. So delete user. Once I run this, we see that the user was logged. And if we go back to Prisma Studio and I reload here, we can see that those 2 posts were deleted and also that user has been deleted. So this was basically sort of a very brief overview of what that means in practice. But I want to sort of emphasize the different options and how they work. And so for that, I'm going to also demonstrate different options rather than cascade. So coming back to our code, I'm going to open up again the Prisma schema here. And instead of cascade, what I want to do is I want to set this to restrict. And what I expect restrict to do is that restrict will actually fail the deletion request. Sorry, the deletion query on the user will fail if there are related posts. So we'll go back here. We'll clear the database first and then run the seed. And that will give us these 2 users again. And one thing to note is because this is managed on the Prisma layer, every time you change when referential integrity is set to Prisma and you change some of the referential actions, it's important to run Prisma generate. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to run npx Prisma generate. And after that's generated, I'm going to open up Prisma Studio again. So we have that. And that's loading. And again, we have the 2 users that I've seeded, and each of these has 2 blog posts. And if I go back to the script, let's look at the delete user. So here I'm deleting Bob, and because Bob has two related posts, I expect this to fail. And so if I run now here, I run, what was the command, npm run delete user, I expect this to throw an error. And indeed, it's throwing an error because we're trying to violate this required relation. And so again, the referential integrity has been maintained by Prisma and sort of verified by Prisma because the database has no constraints that prevent this from happening as they normally do. Ruben Porter asked a very specific and relevant question. So first of all, thank you for your question. And you asked, what command did you run to clear your database? So typically, this is something that I would do with Prisma migrate reset. In this case, because of the nature of how PlanetScale works and the different workflows that it supports when it comes to migrations and so on, I've just created a script here called clear. And all that does is, you can see that here, all it does is it just does the delete many. So that's how I cleared it. But typically that's something that I would use Prisma db push force reset. That's one option. Or if you're using migrations, you can use the Prisma migrate reset command. So these are the two. Okay, so we saw how Cascade works when referential integrity is set to Prisma. We saw how restrict works when you set that to Prisma. And I think we can hide your question. Thanks, Ruben, for the feedback. And now I want to show just the last option that I think is quite relevant for many of you out there, and that is set null. Again, I'm going to go back here, first clear the database. After I clear it, I'm going to seed the database and then run Prisma generate to make sure that the changes are reflected. And Prisma generate. I'm going to rerun Prisma Studio just so we can browse that. Okay, so coming back here, we set it to null. If I get the two users, where do we have that command? Get users. Then we should expect to see the two users that we created, each with two posts. And now when I delete the users, well, when I delete one of the users, let's see what happens to the posts. And so the user was deleted. And now if I go back to Prisma Studio and I reload it, we can see that we have one user, Alice, that wasn't deleted. And then we have 4 blog posts. But these 2 blog posts do not have a foreign key. And let's also look at the find users, get users, that was. And there we have it. So we have Alice with 2 posts. Let's do another query to get the posts. Find many. And I think that should actually do. Find many and log that. And let's run that. And there we have it. So we have 4 blog posts, and it seems that there is a bug after all. We'll take a look at why that happened, but essentially we have the author ID still set to 15, even though it should be null. So let's double check why that's happening. I'll look again at the Prisma schema. So on delete, that should be set to null. I'll save that. I will also clear the database. And I will get the users. That should be clear. That's right. And then we can, before we seed, we can run generate. And let's see if that works. Okay, now we can seed it. Thanks, Mahmoud. My colleague just recommended that I run generate. Let's see if that works. Okay, so we've seeded and created these two users, each with two blog posts. I'm going to just close Studio for now. And now I'm going to delete a user. Let's see how that works. Okay, so our user was deleted, and now I'm going to try to get the users. And let's see if we were able to get that working. Okay, so it looks like we've detected a bug specifically with the set null option. As we saw, Cascade worked correctly, and also restrict worked correctly. It looks like there is a bug. I will report that to the Prisma engineering team. And again, this is a preview feature. So the more of you who test this, the better support that we can get for this referential integrity and for the referential actions emulation when referential integrity is set to Prisma. So on that note, I think I will pause there and let's go back to the release notes. And we had Edgard Oliveira, who's saying, hello, Daniel, saying hello here from Manus, Brazil, enthusiastic about what Prisma can do for devs. So thank you for that. We certainly are. And we also had another question. I'm sorry, I can't read Arabic, so I can't say a name, but you asked, can you tell us how to watch the changes in the Prisma schema using NodeMon? So NodeMon, in case you're not familiar, is a tool that automatically reloads your Node.js server when you're doing local development. So when you're doing local development, every time you change the files, instead of having to manually stop Node.js and then restart it so it picks up the updated files, NodeMon will basically watch for changes in the file system, and every time it detects a change in one of the files, it will automatically reload the server. And how this relates to the Prisma schema is actually, so this is not an actual thing that you can do, because when you change the Prisma schema, you're not actually changing any of the Node.js code that is running. It's really running, for example, Prisma generate that will require NodeMon to restart. And so typically, I believe you can configure NodeMon. I think NodeMon even automatically picks up on changes to your node modules. If not, basically just triggering a save on your source folder should help sort that out so that the Node.js server is automatically restarted for you. Okay, let's go back to the release notes. And so that was that was the previous release. So that was referential integrity. And this is really important when you're using PlanetScale. I should also mention that this is a feature that is set to Prisma. So when you're using MongoDB, referential integrity by default will be set to Prisma. And that is because MongoDB does not offer on the database level a lot of these foreign key constraints. That is something that is pretty much exclusive to relational databases. And so because of that, we, of course, want to sort of provide as much compatibility with as many different databases as possible. And for that reason, it's by default set to Prisma, which means that in practice, the same behavior as we saw here for these referential actions, when you're defining relations in a Prisma project that uses MongoDB, Prisma will also emulate those actions specifically for the on-delete actions. Again, we have this feedback issue. So if you are using Prisma with PlanetScale, or if you, for whatever reason, choose to use Prisma referential integrity, oh, great. Thanks for that, Mahmoud. Yes, so we have the watch mode on Prisma generate. So yes, if you are using referential integrity, the preview feature, for whatever reason, we have this feedback issue, and we welcome any feedback that you might have. Besides that, you may remember that we introduced full text search to the TypeScript client, and this is a feature that is specific to Postgres. And so in this release, in today's, in this week's release, 3.11, we are now introducing this as full text search for Postgres as a preview feature to the Go client. And so I believe that we had a question come in earlier about do we support Golang? And yes, we do. I highly recommend that you check that out. In the release notes, you can find a link to the quick start guide for the Go client. And so that was that. Finally, as we sort of reach the last details of this release, I'll just show what Mahmoud, my colleague, replied here. So Prisma Generate can receive this watch flag, which will automatically generate Prisma client for you. We had another comment from Unknown Chungus, who said that my team was using TypeORM, but we are now deciding to switch to Prisma. First of all, I'm glad to hear. I hope that it goes well for you. I've heard from a lot of developers who've made that switch and have been very happy. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're active on the public Prisma Slack. We also have the GitHub discussions. And we also have a comparison page in the docs in case you want to sort of dive deeper into some of the differences between TypeORM and Prisma. So thank you for that. And finally, some of you out there have really been trying out the Prisma Data Platform. And in case you're not familiar, I can give a quick sort of rundown of what the Prisma Data Platform is. But sort of from a high level, the Prisma Data Platform is really one of the easiest ways to sort of start new projects with Prisma. And it offers quite a lot of functionality, especially when it comes to collaboration. We also have the data proxy that some of you have heard about. And so here I have a project. I think I've shown this on What's New in Prisma before, and I have it already imported here. So this is a GraphQL API that was built with Prisma and Fastify, Mercurius, and Nexus. And that is deployed to Railway. And so it's deployed to Railway, and it uses a database, I believe, on DigitalOcean that I set it up with. And using the Prisma Data Platform, there's a lot of extra functionality that I can get. The first thing is that I can get this hosted data browser, which is essentially a hosted version of Prisma Studio, as we saw before. But it has obviously the added benefit that you can invite collaborators, and all they need is just a GitHub account, and then they can, depending on the role that you assign them, you can have them view the data and use Prisma Studio. If they have the right role, they can also modify the data. The second new feature that we've released recently is the Query Console. And the Query Console essentially allows you to write Prisma queries right from here and experiment with that. So for example, I can send this query. I can also modify this query. And again, here you get the same sort of rich auto-completion that you get in VS Code, and this is all running in the browser. For example, let's say I wanted to also include their related posts. I think I misspelled that. And I can run that. And here we have it. We have the related posts. Believe that we can also get the, as I think I showed before, you can also get the count of posts and also the comments. If I run this query, what I expect to see is also the count for each user of how many comments they've left and how many posts they have. Of course, we only have one post here for Alice. We could theoretically just go into the data browser and add more. We can also do something interesting here, just to show some of the querying functionality. So you can order it by posts, and we can actually order it by the count of posts. And so as we have it here, we expect to see the same results here, unless I set it in ascending order. And let's see how that's, yeah, so there we go. We have it. We have um, the user with a single post at the end. And so that was ordering by relation count, and that was getting the relation count. So really, you can explore the full API. We support a bunch of workflows. So if you just want to get started, you can go to cloud.prisma.io, and you can actually create a new project from scratch using a template that we have, and that will create the GitHub repository for you. And you can also provision a database on Heroku, a Postgres database using the Prisma data platform. And then, of course, we have one of the features that many of you have been waiting for, and that is the Prisma Data Proxy. And the Prisma Data Proxy is right now in early access. And what it does is it essentially serves as a connection puller. So if you're using serverless, like if you're deploying your application using serverless functions, using Vercel, AWS Lambda, Netlify, whichever platform you choose to use, and you're using serverless functions in, you typically have this common problem where each time a request comes in, a function instance starts, and it has to open up a connection to the database. And that takes up quite a lot of time if you have to do that for every request when it comes in, especially when compared to the sort of older serverful approach where you just have the connection open and the server is running for you. And so when a new user request comes in, it doesn't have to sort of open up a new connection to the database. The other thing is that is a very common challenge that this Prisma Data Proxy solves is exhausting the connection limit of the database. And this is because relational databases are quite expensive when it comes to opening connections to them. And so they typically impose some kind of a limit on the number of open connections that you can have. And each time that a new connection is opened up, it actually, the database has to go and allocate resources, memory, and so on. And when this happens for every user request, it really becomes a burden. And when you exhaust the connection limit, you start getting failed requests. And so the Prisma Data Proxy has a bunch of benefits. First of all, it handles the connection pulling for you, and it sort of sits as an intermediary infrastructure component that sits between your serverless functions and your database, and it keeps open connections to the database, and then it sort of funnels them through. And so this is something that is somewhat similar to what PG Bouncer does, except that PG Bouncer is specific to Postgres. And of course, with the Prisma Data Proxy, we aim to provide a lot more additional functionality. And so the Data Proxy is really just the beginning of something much, much larger. And so if you're interested, if you're using Prisma in serverless environments, I highly recommend that you check this out. We have a sign-up form, and we're slowly onboarding some of the users onto this Prisma Data Proxy. So if you're a heavy user of serverless, sign up for this, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you participate in the early access program. So with that, let's look at some of the questions that we had coming in. So we had a question if we accept donations. As far as I know, we do not accept any donations right now. So stay tuned, that might change. We're also, I should say, sponsoring 2 projects on GitHub, and you can see that on our GitHub page, I believe. Yes, so let's see if we can find that. There we go, yeah, there we have it. So we are actually sponsoring 2 developers, and these are the 2. One of them is PNPM, which we use, and I believe that this is the creator of Node API, which is a minimal library for creating direct bindings between Node.js and Rust. And this was also a generally available feature that we already have. It's enabled by default. So if you're using 3.01 or up, you're already using Node API. And so we're sponsoring this developer who worked on API for Rust and Node.js. And that was just a note on donations. And then we had someone who mentioned we already switched one project with Prisma with MongoDB, another one waiting for some features like nearby search in Mongo. So I believe that's geospatial queries. Yes, I believe we should already have a feature request for that. And if we don't, I'll take a look. Would be great if you can create one so that we can prioritize this. And we also had a fantastic question from Bambooholic, who asked, do you have to pay in the future to use this service? Great platform. So first of all, thank you, Bambooholic. Right now, the pricing hasn't been fully figured out, but we want to have a free plan that is free forever that individual developers can use. So there will be some paid features in the Prisma data platform, and I just encourage you to stay tuned. But we are aiming to allow developers, especially individual developers, to have a generous free plan that they can use. Okay, let's see if we have anything else to share today. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them now. And let's take a look. Okay, so there's nothing more to share from my side. It was a rather brief what's new in Prisma today. Thank you so much for joining. And I will report the bug that we noticed with referential integrity, especially when referential actions is set to set null on delete. That was the one bug that we encountered through this. Again, this is expected with preview features. We're really making an effort to release often and to thoroughly test things before they become generally available. So it's quite expected that some things like this may happen. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for tuning in today. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button. That way you can get notified about all of the new content that we have coming up. My colleague, Mahmoud, who's active in the chat, is also working on a fantastic course that if you haven't checked out already, I highly recommend you do. You can find it on our blog, and the first part of this series that focuses on Next.js, GraphQL, TypeScript, and Prisma, all the hottest web development technologies. And the first part really focuses on data modeling, which is really the foundation for any application. So great course, great content by Mahmoud. And you can see here all of the different technologies that are being used, really. So it's Nexus for, fully type-safe GraphQL schemas. It's using Auth0, Tailwind, CSS, a really great utility-first CSS framework. And I believe that the next parts of this series will also be released in the... Yes, so from what I hear, part 2 comes out on Friday. Woo! That's wonderful. So stay tuned. Also, another announcement, we have 2 Prismates, I should say, 2 Prisma employees who will be presenting at GraphQL Conf 2021, which is happening on the 29th of September. That is in 6 days from now, so that's next Wednesday. You can sign up at graphqlconf.org. And I will be speaking about building type-safe GraphQL APIs with Prisma. And yeah, that will happen. That will be one of the last talks of the first day. And my colleague, Etel, she will also be on a panel discussing the state of GraphQL. And this will be with Eve Porcello, another great name, another great advocate in the GraphQL space. She's also done a workshop on Prisma Day. Kelly Gooch from Commerce Tools, Laurie Barth, and Michel... well, I'm going to have difficulties pronouncing these names, but these are all really some of the thought leaders in the GraphQL space. So there's a lot of great stuff. Sean Grove from OneGraph, really, the list just goes on and on. So I'm super excited about this conference, and I hope to see you there. And with that, I think it's time for us to wrap up. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you here once again for What's New in Prisma for the next release in 2 weeks. All right, goodbye.